Welcome to Afterlives with Kara Cooney, in which we discuss ancient Egyptian history and relevant current events that we think will be of interest to our audience. I am Kara Cooney, and I'm a professor of Egyptology at UCLA. This podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at UCLA. In recent years, I've become active in communicating with the general public about the history of ancient Egypt through lectures, interviews, social media, books, and guest appearances. This podcast is my opportunity to take the kinds of deep dives into history that are not always possible in academic formats.
And we're back. So for the second half, which I now think this will be a two-parter, we're going to talk about true crime, which is my favorite
topic.
Love of life.
I don't watch these things because I can't experience them fictionally.
I don't know why I like it.
But I read some things, but I can only read so much. Like I watched.
Sometimes I can't read it.
I read Away. What is it called, Amber? I'll Be Gone in the Dark about the Golden State Killer. Yes. And then I couldn't have my windows open in the house for like a year. So that's not helpful.
See, to me, I'm like prepared. Like I know every possible option. We watch like shows, and I figure stuff out before they happen.
That's
like,
my mother.
So ready.
It's my mother. She's like, that's the person who murdered them.
I just know. I'm like, he's at it. It's always the most medium expected. Not the one you most definitely expect. It's not the least expected. It's the
what article did I just send you? I sent you an article.
I have it.
Oh, you have it there?
From
really?
The Atlantic.
Is it the Atlantic? It's my favorite.
It's Atlantic article about, are there actually way more serial killers than we think?
And they're getting away with murder literally because technology allows them to do all kinds of things and to stay hidden in a way that they couldn't in the 70s or whatever.
That, and just having listened and watched a lot of true crime stuff, a lot of times the police mess up. And
a lot of times, no joke, you're kidding. And of course, instead of reading the article, because I can't handle it, I just sent it to Jordan. I'm like, it's for you. Yeah. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. But ancient Egyptian style.
Yes. But first, there's a conception or notion that serial killers, murders, all these things are, well, not murders, but serial killers are a modern phenomenon. Mm-hmm. One, do you have any thoughts on this? Do you think this is true? Why do you think this is? I have personal thoughts that I think it's connected to the rise in mass media and making someone like a celebrity of, like you can like make a Jack the Ripper.
You sent me an article saying that this idea of murder being somehow sexed up is a Victorian invention, right? And what was the name of the book you were telling me about?
The Invention of Murder. Rose and I read it. Yes. It's a good book. I could maybe read it. Yeah, it's interesting because it's all about this.
It's about feeding the ego with your murder and being the person who can take someone's life. And in a capitalist, without rails society, that certain people, i.e. men, can do these things. Yeah,
well, right? And then when we get into the whole discussion of why there are only mostly male serial killers and all these other issues. And I think so in ancient cases, we can think of cases of murder, aplenty, and maybe even serial killers, right? We can think of monarchs in most cases who commit serial killings, but we don't usually label them.
No, we don't, because they have power.
Yeah. So like, why do you think like Nero, or you can think of like all these Roman emperors that would maybe that people classify, he was,
Stalin,
has
Hitler,
is a sociopath, is a all these, we can like backtrack and label them with all these psychoses. But why don't we typically not think of them in the same light as, maybe John Wayne Gacy or Jeffrey Dahmer today?
Well, it's implied then, and this is not my field, but this is implied that the serial killer is trying to manufacture power that he does not otherwise have. And that the person who is the autocrat in whatever form is not a killer because it is his,
as you say, that
it's his power to
somehow right. Yes. Or it's okay.
He is meting out justice. So yes.
Right. That somehow Nero or something, it's okay if they do that thing. Also want to shout out to the Peopling the Past podcast because they had a post about from Debbie Felton's. She's a professor at classics at UMass Amherst, and she just wrote a book called Monsters and Monarch about this assumption, where she argues that there's actually plenty of ancient evidence for serial killers, murders, stalkers, and all this stuff. So I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list. But she did a short little article online talking about it. And one of the quotes that I think that stood out to me that I think you'll really like, because we've talked about it in the past, was that the human mind, human behavior, and human emotions have remained very much the same across time. So why wouldn't there also have been serial killers and murderers? And
that's really interesting.
They're present now, so they had to have been present back then too.
And Rose Campbell's work at EDFU. Rose Campbell, Dr. Rose Campbell, she got her PhD 3 years ago at UCLA. And she's a bioarchaeologist / Egyptologist now working at the Getty. And the dig that she was working on with Nadine Muller, who's the director of that dig at EDFU, they found, what was it? Like it was like a grain silo where someone was thrown down into 2 bodies in a grain silo. And one of them had the wounds of protecting the body. And Rose had a particular way of referring to that. I don't remember what it was, but some sort of it like happens so often. Defensive wounds. But that a woman defends herself like this or like this and gets wounded here so often that the forensic archaeologist or a specialist can identify that wound. And both of those women were naked. And their clothing would have been found. Too. It was but I think it was in a different deposit. Like it was like the trash dump. So 2 naked women, young, dumped into that grain silo. It's a really sad story, but there's an example right there. And then you, in your head, you can conjure all the different possibilities of how they ended up in such a position and what happened to them. And so going back to your Atlantic article, so this essentially looks at are serial killers way more prominent now than they were, and it argues that yes, and that the FBI and other, investigative bodies argue that less than 1% of all killings are serial. But the article argues that it's actually way more, and we just don't know. We're bad at tracking these things. And they're using numbers of unsolved murders, etc., and how many more there are. What's a serial killer? He has to have the same MO and all these other things. And that if they're switching up their MO, you might not link these things together. So then I'm thinking in the ancient world, this had to have been happening too, but they had even less forensic science. So you could in my head, I'm always just thinking, you could get away with it so much easier. In the ancient world. People would just disappear, or so-and-so would be found dead in the river, and I have to say probably yes, but what kind of evidence we're going to have for this, I don't really know, except for archaeological evidence, like what you find, like bodies. What Rose finds. You find like the body that has the arrowhead in it or something, or like Otzi. Right. He presumably someone shot him with. But that's not a serial killer. Yes, that's just different. Like that's him getting shot by someone who's like, "Why are you on my land?" and go away, and then he gets shot, and then he dies up in the mountains days later. But and those 2 women, it might not have been. Could have been just serial murder. It could have been like his mother and his wife or something, and he murders both of them and then dumps them in there, and no one does anything to him. Or maybe they do mete out punishment, but leave those bodies where they are and keep it as. But that doesn't make sense that they were never discovered. It's not an Egyptian thing to leave bodies like that just out. In a grain silo. It's not an Egyptian thing. They would have taken those bodies out and cared for them in some way. To leave them there is unless not that was like their punishment for doing something else. So again, the Rose Campbell situation is the most serial killer of them all. I don't think she's published this work yet. She's given papers on it at ASOR. And we can put references up in the show notes, but I don't think there's a publication as of yet. But people murder people out of passion all the time, but that's not serial killing. Serial killing is like, how do I create a power for myself that I don't already have by murdering, I don't know, 14-year-old boys, or and it's usually like a sexual sort of inadequacy that someone's trying to fix or solve, or a misogynist sort of that's why I always connect it to like the modern world, that it's something like lacking in modern society that creates these types of people. Maybe. I mean, the other thing about the modern world that doesn't happen in Egypt these days is we don't have time. In Egypt you can go into the 4 walls of your space and not be bothered. But if you're in Egypt today, everyone is your in-law, everyone's in your space, everyone's always talking to you, because there is this understanding that you're not meant to be alone, that no one wants to be alone. Everyone's in your business, and that's the way the community thrives and survives.
So if something happens, they're going to know who it was.
And I've said this a million times, that I am safer at 3 a.m. in Cairo than I am in any city here in the United States, because here in the United States, everyone's like, I'm minding my own business, this is my own thing. And in Egypt, everyone is in your business, and it makes everything
Eyes
safer.
on the street.
Yes. So I mean, I'm not saying it didn't happen in the ancient world, but I think people are more in people's business in the ancient
People
Egyptian
travel
space
less
too.
perhaps back then too. So, if people are going missing in your village.
And serial killing, see, I don't know this. Serial killing is usually associated with travel. Like you go to another place, kill, and then you go back.
I mean, not necessarily, but typically they're localized. Like Golden State Killer was like around a certain area, and when he moved down towards LA, it was like
it was noticed.
They didn't catch on to it a while because they thought it was someone else, right? So it takes time to like put that it's the same person. But if you're in a small village and 5 people go missing and die, it's going to be something that's noticed very quickly,
I would imagine.
But
the other thing I mean, there's no police.
That's my other thing, was there's like no in criminal investigation kind of set up.
Formal criminal investigation is the kind of thing that one family or a coalition of families is going to get together and try to solve against another coalition of families, and people will have to take responsibility. Here's the other thing about the ancient world that is very, very interesting, is that people make other groups take responsibility for a murder and don't pin it onto an individual and make the individual only take the responsibility, which means serial killing is a very modern Western thing in which they're like, oh, they can't pin it on me, they won't get it to me. But if somebody is serial killed in one place and they have an idea that it comes from another community, then that entire community could be on the hook for that
or the
person.
Family will be blamed
in terms of money, or there might be an in-kind killing of some, who knows?
Which
but
we see,
it's more communal guilt and communal.
Which we see, like one of the examples later, like Paneb, his dad gets involved and at some point is like distances himself from his son because he's getting some, why is your son doing this, and this? And he's like, no, I will like recuse myself from defending him. So it does get pushed back onto the family.
There's much more communal care in modern day Egypt, and I have to assume from what I know in ancient Egypt as well, including like in the United States, when you see, and we're in Los Angeles, the home of the homeless, where you see somebody having a mental psychotic breakdown on the street daily, I would say now these days, right? People just go along their way and it's no problem. And you're like, oh, psychotic break. Maybe you call 311 or something like that. But in Egypt, from what I have seen, there are communities in Cairo or Luxor where there are the schizophrenic people, and people know who the schizophrenic people are. They know who their families are. And there is a caretaking, a community caretaking that happens. I'm not saying that in the urban expanse of Cairo that people don't get lost and fall through the cracks. They do, but there's more family care. I mean, but that also means that you can't be the individual necessarily that you want to be. You have to, if you're going to get that communal care, you also have to make the exchange and be what the community needs you to be. And that means having the family at the time they want you to have it, marrying the person they want you to marry, having the job that they want you to have, all of these things, and you don't get as much free will.
It's almost like the American individualism is very closely connected to being able to be a serial killer.
I would agree with that 100%. I think that's on point.
Right.
So serial killing, no, it doesn't seem to be a very ancient Egyptian
wouldn't get away
thing.
with it, probably. I feel like you'd get stopped.
Someone in your family or your community would get pegged for it. And then if you're doing that, then you have to know you're taking your own people down. A lot of serial killers are protective of their own people. Their own wife, children, whoever.
The wife doesn't know. And they have this double identity, and
and they know they're getting away with it because they can't individually be pegged for it. But in a different kind of world where their whole community would be responsible, then I think it would be a different decision-making process about whether or not to do it.
So the Professor Felton, who wrote the one book about it, she also argues that monsters, like monsters and myth and stuff like this, might help kind of also explain maybe sometimes where like 5 people go missing and then a myth kind of gets developed of a monster or something like that.
Oh,
and
I see.
that as a way to explain not that there's a serial killer, but that you say, oh, 5 people disappeared and were found dead in the river, and you say, oh, is the monster.
Okay, well, let's go back to Rose Campbell's 2 women found half naked in the grain silo. And you can imagine that the people were like, oh my goodness, these women are gone. Where have they disappeared to? And that kind of thing would have happened in Egypt pretty regularly because of crocodiles and hippos.
Yeah, you just say,
or
oh,
drowning,
they got eaten by an animal.
Yeah, that maybe they went to go wash the clothes and then that was it. They weren't seen again. And something happened. And the Egyptians have a way of dealing with this that they talk about in their afterlife texts that are that the dead who drown or who are snatched into the river, they go to their mother in a sense. They go into that Yitaru, into that river space. And so they don't have to go through all of the trials and tribulations. It's kind of like a fake out to deal with the fact that you've lost your body.
Their death was so traumatic, they already went through it.
But it's also a way of skipping over all of those demands. That you don't need a body, you don't have to have a heart. You just go right. You just skip to the end.
Right in.
You skip to the end, and there are depictions of these dead in Book of Gates, right? Remy has the dead in the river, and they put the river, and then they put the dead bodies. All the souls who have died
so often.
Yeah, it must have the floaters. Yeah, but that means that I guess there's your perfect alibi for any serial killer that was going
just
to
drop them off in the river.
Yeah.
But yeah, myths, monsters, things like this.
Yeah,
I think are a good explanation as well. Okay, let's focus on ancient Egypt so we can get a little bit more into the primary sources.
Okay.
So for ancient Egypt, crime in general, we have very few records for. Right? Murders especially, but like just crime in general, maybe some more, I think most of it would be stealing, theft perhaps. But so why do you think this is? And what's recorded and why? And so why not crime?
Okay, and I'm going to go back to bigger ideas here. For instance, we also don't have a law code in ancient Egypt.
That was one of my other questions.
Right. So there's no, all these other places like Mesopotamia, other parts of the Mediterranean world, there are law codes. If you do this, you get this. If you do that, you get that.
Bible.
And Bible, Hammurabi, for West Asia. And in Egypt, there's one law, that is called a Hep law. And it's essentially that the one who buries gets the inheritance. And it's a New Kingdom law, and then there's no other Heps, no Hepus anywhere. And it's an intriguing thing that in the places that have the law codes, you have more competitive societies, more possibility for individual action outside of the community, and less social inequality. And so I would argue that in the Egyptian circumstance, the ancient Egyptian circumstance, with that much social inequality, you don't have the law codes, and you also then wouldn't write down any court proceedings, arrests, if you call them that, unless it pertains to the highest level of the state. And if it's not pertaining to the highest level of the state, you just get ad hoc decisions being made verbally, nobody recording it
or something.
Exactly.
And make a decision, as long as both parties are happy.
And then it's done. So there's so much less competition. There's less need to cover your tracks bureaucratically and to write things down. What is bureaucracy? What is it making a record of something? A, so you won't forget it, right? But B, to cover your tracks and cover your ass. And if you're not worried about some other competitor coming in and saying, you did that wrong, now you got, you did the police thing wrong, now OJ Simpson, he's innocent, right? So because of that kind of competition, and that the civil rights and the equal empowerment of different people, even in different social strata, if you don't have that and you have a highly patriarchal, highly unequal system, then guy says his decision and that's it.
Well, and so for Egypt, where do we have evidence coming from? We have like treason case, like we have cases involving
the state needs to know,
where you have those recorded,
where they kill the king,
and Deir Medina stuff, which arguably is still a very unique kind of, they record a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it's arguably unique. It's also unique in terms of its preservation, because you're out in the middle of the desert, you get things preserved you wouldn't have otherwise, right? So and I should always be tempered because I get super excited. I'm like, oh, it's because it's a highly unequal society, but it's also quite possible, Kara, as I say to myself, that they could have had these tribunals, the Kenbet, they could have had oracles to determine things, and they could have written things down, but because their villages are next to the river and the river floods its banks, that we don't have any of that documentation.
Could you argue too that perhaps Deir Medina is more literate? So
You
they're more
could.
like have the option to write things down?
So the general argument given by the Egyptologists is Deir el-Medina, because it's a village of craftsmen used to build and decorate the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and Queens, is populated by artisans. Those artisans were thus also literate. And because they were literate, they produced a higher volume of documentation than another village might. Now, to counter that is new work coming out of Holland in particular, that is showing that even the Deir el-Medina documentation is a limited number of scribal hands. That even in that village of educated or semi-educated craftsmen, they're still going to scribe X or scribe Y to have something, to have this exchange where donkey to coffin and with some sandals thrown in recorded, right? So that it would mean that in a particular village near the inundation or within the inundation, that if they're recording something, they would also go to a scribe and record something, but that we wouldn't have it because the inundation means that it's too wet, it's not going to survive.
Or if they're using a material that's not stone,
if they probably put on potsherds, and then you find a pot without the ink written on it. The pot will be there. But remember, Egyptology doesn't investigate domestic sites well because of the amount of, because people live there, because you have to get through a whole lot of wet earth, because you have to use pumps. It's just really, really hard to investigate domestic spaces.
Melts.
So there's a whole lot of problems there.
So we do have some examples. So I pulled some case studies for us to talk about.
All from Deir el-Medina? Not all.
Well, the first, I think, major case is the Egyptology's bad boy, Paneb. So I think he's a great case to just talk about Deir el-Medina. We have some other instances from Deir el-Medina of dudes hitting each other in the head, and then the guy getting his punishment was sent to cut a stone. So there's little instances, or of a policeman sentenced to compulsory labor for hitting someone with a stick when he wasn't supposed to. So that's interesting. Some police, and there's that late Ramazid letter, which I remember translating, of the Magi, someone plotting to kill two Magi and then it not falling through and stuff like that. So there's some that's Nojmet and Pionk, right? I think he writes to her or she writes to him. I should know this better. Obviously, I remember translating. They know too much, these policemen, and I think he writes to her and says, those policemen that know that thing that we were talking about that time, very on the down low, have them killed, put them into baskets, and have them thrown in the river. So something's happening that the policemen are not supposed to know. They don't want to pay off the policemen. They need them gone. And so they put that down in a letter and said, get rid of those two dudes. And is it only two? No, it might be more than two. I've plot to kill two in the letter. The one, it's P. Berlin 1048-7 and 1048. Okay. But most of our, I think, really good evidence for it is from multiple mentions of this individual Paneb. Right. So who is he? What's his deal? Yeah, Paneb was a workman in the village of Deir el-Medina. He was he was a member of the crew of the guys who decorated the tombs. And he got up to no good. He did all kinds of things. Like, the story I like is that there's a law proceeding against him by his enemies at Deir el-Medina, listing all of the things that he did. But and this is probably biased against him because the dude who's writing the letter is trying to get his job. So he's trying to get Paneb fired. Yes. And he's saying, I should have had this job. But it sounds like Paneb is a bad dude anyway. Yes. Yeah. And that he's just, he does what he wants when he wants to. He reminds me just of a Donald Trump, I'm a rich boy, he's the chief workman. I can walk into New York and shoot someone and get away with it type of vibe. Isn't he adopted? Amber, will you look for us? I'm pretty sure. So I know he's adopted. So he takes his brother's inheritance. He kills, the one claim against him is that he kills his brother, and then he's the one who takes the job that this dude writing the Astrakhan was supposed to get. Right. And that he gifted the vizier 5 stolen slaves to get the job. as chief workman.
Yeah. Okay. So adopted by Neferhotep.
And then he tries to kill his adopted brother, also named Neferhotep.
He doesn't try to kill his father too?
Tries to murder Neferhotep and heard screaming, "I will kill you," in the night.
Right.
And then instead he just assaults 9 other men that same night. So
he assaulted
just like very toxic man.
Wow.
Just going around.
And my favorite story is is the one where he's in the tomb of Seti II.
Seti Merenptah, yeah.
Yeah. And he's in the tomb of Seti II, sitting on the sarcophagus, just hanging out.
Yes.
So he's sitting on the enclosure of the god, if you like, just hanging out and not being respectful at all. So he was an interesting guy. But Jordan raises a really, really interesting point. How much of this are we supposed to believe? Because the people who are writing this about Paneb are trying to take him down. And yet on the other side of it, if a whole village is going along with this,
multiple instances,
and if there are multiple instances, and if he keeps coming up in the documentation, then this was a difficult guy. Something's going on. Something's going on.
So a list of his crimes, right?
Oh, here we go.
He stole stone from Seti Merenptah's tomb to then use this in his own tomb.
That's extraordinary.
Which is just, I think, hilarious.
Yeah.
That as chief workman, was sending the workmen to go to the pharaoh's tomb to take stone and then bring it back and use it in his own, which I just makes me chuckle. He was stealing like large tools, large chisels.
Yeah.
He attempts to murder his brother, Neferhotep, heard screaming in the night, "I will kill you," in the night, and said assaults 9 other men. And after all of this, and then Neferhotep reports this to the vizier that he tries to murder me, and he only gets punished with a beating. So it kind of shows you the level of justice system that he attempted murder.
Who beats him? The Magi beat him?
The vizier orders it. So presumably.
Oh, the vizier orders it.
Yeah, it goes all the way to.
It goes all the way up to the vizier. I should have known that. Sorry. That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And then he just disappears.
Well,
that's it.
So then we have some other ostraca that list other charges.
Yeah.
And this one relates with just one thing. So it relates about him sleeping with married women.
Yes.
And the way they do it is that he slept with X woman's name who at the time was with so and so.
Yeah.
As denoting that they were married or together.
But what's the word for sleeping with? The word is
neck.
Yeah.
Which some people translate as, slept with. So they were having an affair, a consensual affair. Some people translate as debauched or rape.
Yeah.
Right. So is it not consensual? And that definitely changes the level of evil we have going on here.
Yeah. So the word neck is an interesting one. And if your name happens to be Nicholas and you go to Egypt,
it's still today, in modern Arabic.
Yes, right? It's still. So don't yell out, "Hey, Nick," because you're yelling, "Hey, fuck," is what you're doing. So the name Nick it's a problem in an Arabic speaking country. But the word neck, or in ancient Egyptian, neck, they repeat it, right? Has the connotation of sex that is forcefully taken.
Yes. Not of like love.
No, not like a consensual affair.
Yeah.
It's an arguable point, but if he's necking women that are
for married women
that are with somebody else, then he could be a serial rapist. In addition, using his power as chief workman to do whatever it is that he wants.
Well, and to add further credence to it, there's another document where
or son of chief workman, depending on when it happens. So
there's another document of apparently he to a woman named Yemen Wow, he quote threw her on top of the wall and took her by force.
Oh, I have to look at the Egyptian for that.
They use neck.
Probably they use
but
neck.
Threw her on top of the wall and necked her.
Yeah.
So
it's horrible.
Not good.
It's horrible. He sounds like a very, very bad man, but I mean,
nothing happens to him,
but
that we know of.
Well, what kind of a world do we live in today where the president of the United States can grab him by the pussy and nothing happens to him? And how long did it take for Harvey Weinstein to be exposed, for somebody like Gary Urton at Harvard to be exposed, or other people?
Men in positions of power using their well, and like we can talk about this a little later, but like the justice system is very unclear.
And how much is too much, where people put up with it and like, okay. And then finally, like, you know what? We're not dealing with this.
Presumably
anymore.
You'd want his dad to be like, you would go to his father and be like, you need to control your son.
But then once this father's
dead,
gone,
and
then he's the powerful one because he's been put into this incredibly powerful position. It's tricky, but yeah, no, Paneb is super interesting for understanding how a community deals with somebody who is a bad egg, somebody who's breaking all the norms and is not participating in the community.
But as you said earlier, it shows you what the norms are, right?
Yeah,
so if they're taking the point to write down that he slept with married women, then you know sleeping with married women is not okay. Yeah. Which tells you, about some things. There's other instances too where he was stealing ox from the Ramesseum herd, which I think is like hilarious.
The other thing that's interesting though is he's doing a lot of this stuff at a time period when we know civil war has descended onto,
so maybe he can get away with more.
Maybe you have maybe Northerners fighting against Southerners, and Seti II, maybe the Northerner who's fighting against another Amenes, who's a Southern pretender to the throne, but he actually built a lot of monuments. And Egyptologists usually call him Amenmeses, Ameni, but it's interesting to see it within that political context as well. Does that have anything to do with it? People have suggested it. I have no idea. Yeah. So
he's always an interesting character, and lots of good evidence about him. Moving on to our second case study. Assassinations.
Oh my goodness, yes. There aren't that many. No.
But we have some.
And if we're talking about regicide,
yes,
we have
regicide,
Teddy, maybe.
That's what I have. Teddy down.
And Ramses the Third, definitely.
And I looked into Teddy, and I was wondering if you have more information because I couldn't find too much. It's just Manetho mentions it.
There's Manetho, and then there's Weni, and the two.
But that's for
Weni.
Pepi.
Yes, but he mentions it as a harem issue.
Yeah,
and
there was a secret.
It could have been in the reign before. So that's all.
Yes, because he works through both reigns. And there's a Kanawati article also that he goes into that there was apparently some official who had Teddy's name in his tomb. And then it was erased. And then Userkare's name was filled in, and then it was erased again, and then they put Teddy back in. So, and the argument is that Userkare led a insurrection against Teddy because Userkare's name is different. He has unknown origins, perhaps usurped the throne, killed Teddy, and then he is then deposed, and then Pepi comes back in to fulfill his rightful.
So it's the last king of the fifth.
Yeah.
Where's Unis in all of this? Sixth Dynasty is not my jam.
Yeah.
So
this is just the Kanawati argument that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just that Teddy kind of falls off. Manetho mentions it, that he was assassinated by Userkare and the other priests of Ra. So Userkare having Ra in his name.
Right.
These types of things. And then you see, we don't know Userkare's lineage, not related to Teddy, maybe. Married, and then like Pepi's too young to reign, and then some of the women take very like elite positions of power. So it seems very messy. So perhaps something.
It is quite possible that Teddy was murdered in close contact with people whom he should have been able to trust, right? So, and the fact that the tomb of a private dude at Abydos named Weni mentions this harem stuff, it's possible that he was murdered by a wife. Please don't blame the woman. She's just the one that's in close contact with his body. There's always somebody else behind these things.
So so speaking of Weni, so what do we have from Weni's tomb? He talks about being the one who gets
in charge of secrets,
right?
Yeah.
So he's in charge of hearing secrets, and that there was a issue in the harem.
Yeah.
As we'll use harem. That could be another episode. We could talk about.
Yeah, we have to talk about the harem. Ooh, write that down, Amber. We have to have a harem episode. That would be great fun.
An issue about one of the queens, Weret Yamtes.
Yeah.
And there's a charge, and that he alone is the one to go deal with it and hear it. And
yet he inscribes this in stone on his tomb for all to see. Which is interesting. And
so presumably there was, whether successful or not, there was something was going on that he was in charge of overseeing, and a harem conspiracy.
Something messy happened. He can assume that everyone who's an elite knows what it is. He doesn't need to say what it is.
That's okay.
And he can speak in ambiguities, and that's what we have. That's all we have. So we can't expect anything more.
The other I found some people also have argued that the vizier Raware made an attempt or was somehow involved in this because he suffers of damnatio memoriae afterwards.
Okay, that's interesting.
All of his name is erased from even like non-elite, non-official royal
Okay,
tombs.
cool.
So maybe something's up.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are our first like two hints at maybe regicides, something's going on, coups going on. And then our next one, Middle Kingdom.
Amenemhat the First.
And so what's our sources here?
To Sinue, a literary text, and then the instruction of Amenemhat as written presumably during the reign of his son Senwosret the First, the next king. So
first I want to ask, do you think that there's any import to the fact that we get this tale of this possible regicide from a piece of literature and then didactic text, and like it's not from like a official court recording or log? It's from
propaganda building. And if you weren't trying to build that propaganda and create that narrative, we wouldn't know about this story. We would just see that Amenemhat the First ruled for a pretty healthy 2-decade reign, and then it went to his son Senwosret the First, who also ruled for a very lengthy time, and that's all we would know. But because two pieces of literature, one didactic, as we call it, like an instruction, you should live this way, do things that way, and then one more of a fairy tale kind of thing, the fact that those two pieces were written and became so popular is the only reason that we know about it. And it's interesting because here you have the kings letting the cat out of the bag, so to speak, or the genie out of the bottle is maybe the better analogy, but well,
and to me, reading them, I can read an excerpt. So it's not veiled at all.
No,
it's very,
they don't hide it,
like very upfront, which in other cases, as the wedding example or later on, it's much more referenced metaphorically or something like this.
So there is power being gained in telling this story to, I would argue, shut down competing factions and maybe justify some crackdowns amongst Egyptian society. But go ahead.
We have a quote. So from the instructions of Amenemhat, it was after supper when night had fallen and I had spent an hour of happiness, whatever that means. I was asleep upon my bed, having become weary, and my heart had begun to follow sleep. So he was falling asleep. When weapons of my counsel were wielded, I had become like a snake of the Acropolis. As I came to, I awoke to fighting and found that it was an attack of the bodyguard. If I had quickly taken weapons in my hand, I would have made the wretches retreat with charge. But there is none mighty in the night, none who can fight alone. No success will come without a helper. So he falls. Look, my injury happened while I was without you, speaking to his son, when the entourage had not yet heard that I would hand over to you when I had not yet sat with you. Okay, so he was by himself. He couldn't defeat all these attackers. And he's
not by himself. He's with the bodyguard who should be protecting him.
They attacked him.
And in every case that we know of a regicide, it's always the people that should be the safest, the most vetted, if you like. They're the ones that turn, that betray and try to take power, not for themselves, but on behalf of other people. Because a bodyguard is not going to get to become king, nor is a wife in the harem with whom he's sleeping, because she's probably too young or what, there's no way. So,
and then how does Sinue deal with it?
Sinue is interesting because Sinue talks about being an administrator of the harem. And then
people have argued that he's maybe involved, or
he's there when things are happening, freaks out to such an extent that he flees Egypt, goes off to Syria, goes off to West Asia, like goes into exile. Like it makes him look certainly very, very guilty.
Very suspicious.
But he says in the text, I didn't have anything to do with it, but I knew that when everyone found out what was going on, it's going to come to me. So he runs away.
He was going to be the scapegoat or something.
Yeah. And ends up marrying a Syrian girl, going through all kinds of trials and tribulations, has to fight a giant, kind of a David and Goliath sort of story. And then ends up getting invited back by the king, Senwosret the First. And
the queen.
And
they're like, you want to die in Egypt, come back. And
so he gets to come back from his exile and he gets a super tomb and becomes a 1%er. Right. So,
but and I think too, like the description is a little bit more vague here, where it's, the king goes aloft to heaven and becomes united with the sun disk.
Yeah.
So he died.
That's always
But
euphemistic.
it's a little bit
like
more
saying he passed.
But it's not saying that he
right?
was murdered.
No, it doesn't
there's a
matter what the
vague-
manner of death is. He's
Yeah.
still going to always go and unite with the sun disk or fly away to
Yeah.
heaven. That's always a given.
But then you get the residence was hushed, hearts were mourning,
Mhm.
the courtiers crouched, head on
Mhm.
lap, grieving. So, and the sun was off.
This is from the instruction?
No, this is from Sinaway.
Oh, it's from Sinaway.
And
I
then
always get them mixed
Sinwazret
up,
was
sorry.
off fighting the Libyans. So it happened when he was the crown prince was gone.
Right.
So
Um,
I guess a good time to have a coup.
yeah, an excellent time to have a coup, because then there's somebody else that is probably close in age to him with as much of a claim, who can come in and say, kingship's going to come to me now, and try to move both of these guys to the side.
Which is what was attempted for our next assassination.
Yeah, Ramses III.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's that story?
So that story we only have from the Turin judicial papyri, which they're the most amazing things. Like the text on that papyrus is like this tall, it's huge. And it's obviously, and the
it's
lines
long.
are these big, long lines. It is a very long papyrus. And it's almost like they needed to go and document this so that like 57 people could read it. Beautiful hieratic hand.
Yep.
And well, so the story is, from what we can piece together, is that there was a conspiracy of people within the harem. Harem being defined as a collection of young female individuals who are there to sexually service the king and procreate with him. Yes. And there's administrators, there's older women, there's all kinds of people involved in
children,
in this conspiracy.
The doorkeepers, the butler,
the guardians, multiple butlers, many of them
butlers.
with foreign Syrian or West Asian names. And multiple wives are involved. Even the wives of the doorkeepers are said to be involved, because they're go-betweens between,
or they knew about it and didn't tell anyone.
Right.
Yeah.
But the text itself is very, very vague about what actually happened to the king. So you know that you don't get like an amazing narrative like you have with Sinue, and where it's like, oh, I was without you and I fell and it was horrible. You just know these people are in serious trouble, and the 1%ers commit suicide, or forced to commit suicide.
Yeah, they're allowed to commit suicide.
And the other people might get impaled.
Some people are killed. Some people who aren't as involved had their noses and ears cut off.
But the only reason that we know that Ramses III was actually killed, is because Zahi Hawass did an examination of the mummy, and they unwrapped it and looked at the neck, and there is a cut that goes all the way practically to the backbone of the body,
all of it,
almost a severed head,
and his toe was chopped off. So at least two people were attacked. Someone slit his throat and someone hacked his toe off, and the toe didn't show any healing. So like it was very close to death. I didn't know
that about the toe.
Yeah.
So is that in the JAMA thing, or
so no? It's in all the like news articles that talk about that article, but I read the JAMA article and it's not mentioned.
So the publication of all of this work by Zahi Hawass is in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and I think you can find that online, and we can put it in the show notes too. But also understand that for a lot of this kind of work, you can only find the information from watching the documentary. And I don't know which, is it on Discovery or?
It was Discovery Channel, yeah.
So that's where you'll find more information.
They also did the DNA of the unknown man E.
To say that he was somehow involved?
Well, everyone thinks it was, how he looks like scared, and he was wrapped in a sheepskin. So they think it's Pentaware. And he is based off the DNA from the study.
That's what they say? Son. Really? Truly?
They genetically,
according to the documentary,
and the study, and this, based off Ramses' DNA and unknown E, they could be father son, but like the genetics are so close, they could also be probably like uncle, nephew. And
why would you keep the guy?
Well, he ends up in the DD-320 cache.
Why would you put the man
in a goat
who murdered the king in the royal tomb? I don't understand any of it.
But everyone just, it's a goat skin, so he was damned.
But how do we know?
What if he was foreign?
He could have been in a goat skin. I don't buy it. It's too convenient. Don't buy any of it.
So we're just tracking back a little for more the details about the story. So when did this happen? So it happens, beautiful Feast of the Valley. Ramses in Thebes.
It says he's in a high place in the
which
text.
People construct to be
the high gate of Medinet Habu temple, that he's up there in this space that's a harem space that's depicted with all of these scenes of Ramses III hanging out with his ladies, all naked and playing chess together and hanging out. He's touching and fondling all of these girls. And the suggestion is in that space, he was actually hanging out with his women in that space, and that's where
he went to
this
take a
happened.
nap or something and sleep.
I have no idea.
Someone opened the door, let him in.
But they obviously cut his throat, which is something that takes close access, intimate access, and connection to a body that is unprotected.
Yeah.
Ideally naked. So a harem is a brilliant place to pull that kind of thing off.
Yeah. I think too, as you mentioned, there's kind of more, obtuse references to his death, and it's unclear if he was dead. The papyrus starts with Ramses III commissioning the tribunal so it seems like he was alive.
Yeah.
But some people argued like, oh, they're just saying that. It's not that he actually is alive. It's Ramses IV doing the tribunal.
Right.
It's unclear when he actually died.
I mean, with the cut to his throat, there's no way the man could still
that would
have been alive.
30 seconds.
The other interesting thing about this papyrus and the whole thing is where the murder happens. It happens in Thebes, and who is being murdered? It's Ramses III, who is from a northern family, and the Thebans arguably have been in power for hundreds of years in Egypt, and they're just sick of this. They have the 19th dynasty to deal with that northern family. Now they've got the 20th dynasty to deal with Setnach's family, and Ramses III obviously being Setnach's son. So there could be some north-south disagreements, and this disagreement is finding its end result in regicide itself.
Well, and like one of the main conspirators is supposed to have been kind of trying to insurrect the whole city. Not just they're trying to have the coup, but they're also trying to get everyone like in Medina to strike and incite this whole thing. So it's not just that they assassinated the king, but they were also trying to create a power revolution of some sort. Yeah.
And whoever you don't kill the king without having some sort of a plan, a strategy to put your guy on the throne. So the main
person who gets always blamed for this is the one queen, T.
Yeah.
And that it's the idea is that she created this conspiracy or this rebellion to put her son on the throne.
And I've just written an article about this that's going to be in an edited volume that I did with Danny Candelora and Nadia Ben Marzouk. And it's arguing that while we blame the women for these things, the women are the ones who have the access to the naked body and they're in the palatial environment. And so they're the ones that are close to all of this accessibility, but they're not the ones who are going to benefit from the power move. And so we as Westerners, outsiders, colonialists, whatever you want to say, are judging the situation from the outside and saying, oh, look at this woman is trying to get her son on the throne and she actually has this motive. We don't know what the situation was. We don't know how much she was being co-opted or controlled to do these things. It's not clear.
The papyrus says for Pentaware, the son, says he was brought in because he had been in collusion with Tia, his mother, when she had plotted the matters with the women of the harem. So it seems like it was not just her idea, it was a group concerning making rebellion against the Lord.
And the other thing that I point out in this article is that the women of the harem, each and every one of them is connected to a different family. And if this is a Theban harem, then they're connected to different Upper Egyptian families. And so there is a political aspect to this, where you have all of these different Upper Egyptians trying to take their power back, potentially from Northerners.
Thinking even bigger, like the context of Ramses III's reign, what was going on in Egypt, and people, we have the strike happening at Deir Medina, right? So it's like people were clearly unhappy. Things weren't going great. There was invasions by sea peoples.
Yeah. You have Libyan raids and other things continuing. It is a good time to possibly
have someone.
The economy is not going well. Grain prices are exploding. There's probably famines. It's not a good time to be king because you're going to be blamed for all of these bad things that are happening. And Ramses III himself, like looking at his situation, that would be such a good biopic. I mean, seriously, you guys, be the best, because his father is Setnach, who comes in and
that's a whole
removes the female king Tawasret from the throne, takes Egypt back for this Delta dynasty, and and then Ramses III gets invaded by all these Sea People Libyan coalitions, and he defeats them. He's the warlord's son who is able to make good and protect Egypt, and yet politically he has no idea. He doesn't know what he's doing, and in the end he ends up getting murdered because he's not politically able to win hearts and minds in Upper Egypt. He's a good soldier, he's a good general, but he's not necessarily the politician that Egypt needs at this time.
The Thebans wanted.
Yeah.
I was reading through a couple articles about, the various sources we have for this, and a couple of them were arguing, I think it was the Goitica article and some other ones also argued that both Papyrus 1 and the judicial papyri from Turin aren't actually government documents, but that they were found in Western Thebes, and that they argue that they were for Ramses when he died to help precede him to the afterlife, to like explain things, which I was just like,
only Hans Goethe could come
I know,
up with
well,
an
yeah,
like that. But
because I was like, why would you need to write down the accused, and like the judicial papyri is like accused so and so, accused of high treason, convicted, death, and it's just a list of 30 people.
But the judicial papyrus is because it's a set of different papyri, is a confusing thing because it's written for display. It's written as a presentation piece, and you're wondering who is it presented to.
Well,
and
Ramses
why
the fourth presumably is
he's asking, he's sending scribes down and king's butlers down. He's sending his men down to do an investigation and to make things clear who has the power. And but how this process was used, how public it was, who was meant to see it, it's not clear.
And like how their deaths were preceded. Presumed, you'd maybe want to have them be very public to scare people off from trying to do something similar in the future. But
and the other cool thing about that papyrus is that there was witchcraft involved, and they're accused of using witchcraft or a sorcery, occult sorts of magic. And also that the tribunalists that were sent down to make the judgments apparently were co-opted by the women of the harem who were flirting with them and maybe giving sexual favors, so that they were compromised as well.
I didn't know that. That's
and
great.
that part's pretty amazing. So that's written into this text as well. And it's a shit show. It's just a mess. And Ramses the Fourth, like Senwosret the First, is the son of a murdered king and has to then create. This is, I would argue, the beginning of Ramses the Fourth trying to manufacture the propaganda to prop up his kingship. And he probably would have done a better job if he wasn't being invaded by Sea Peoples, Libyan raids, economic downturn, and all of the things that come with the Bronze Age collapse. So if that hadn't happened, then maybe we would be able to speak about Ramses the Fourth's propagandistic manufacture a little bit more positivistically. But as it is now, it didn't work. He's not as long lived as he would like, and that's
kind
it doesn't
of
build what
the beginning
he
of the end.
And it's after Ramses III is killed, you see for Ramses III, you see extraordinary material production in Thebes. You've got a whole temple in Karnak. You've got Medinet Habu, which is still standing and beautiful today. And his tomb is really, really nice. And so there's lots of production in the Theban region, not to mention Upper Egypt as a whole. After he's murdered and you move on to Ramses IV, they don't build shit. They're like, you guys are on your own. We're not giving you any jobs. No more jobs for you.
Any other assassinations you think of possibly? There's that one story of Osorkon the Third, like fighting off people, but that's like a whole just messy.
When you get into Third Intermediate period, it's a disaster. And
like he fought them off himself and then like burned their bodies or something. And
I'm not even going to try. I'm sure there's more regicides, and there's really interesting work by Walter Scheidel on this point, who talks about, he compares places that are more competitive, where you have things written down about a murder of a king, and then places that are less socially equal, more unequal as a society, less competitive, and where you wouldn't ever write down the regicide, because the person who's holding the bloody knife in one place gets to be king. The person who's holding the bloody knife in another place gets to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So it depends on how you benefit from it. So there were probably more regicides in ancient Egypt. We just don't have evidence for them, and nobody wrote them down. And people just, all of a sudden the king is dead. Oh, I wonder how he died. Oh, we don't know.
Yeah. Or the new king has different background. And,
probably happened all the time.
Yeah.
Not all the time,
but more than these, like 4 case studies we talked about.
But never forget that divine kingship exists in Egypt for a reason, because you have long-lived kings, pretty well protected, a community that likes the status quo and is interested in keeping that king on the throne, and dynasties that last a hell of a lot longer than any other part of the Mediterranean, North African, or West Asian world. So it makes sense.
It worked.
Yeah.
Whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
Quickly touch upon justice, which I know is a really tough subject about, because we don't, again, as you said earlier, we don't really have a law code.
Yeah.
Things seem a little bit ad hoc.
A lot ad hoc.
But we do have evidence of like courts.
Yeah.
Right, like kenbets and stuff like these functioning, or like from the Dir el-Medina evidence, they get always taken to the riverbank, to the place of examining, as something's going on there. Yeah,
I mean, this is such a hard topic, because while you have Dir el-Medina, it is a unique place. It is a village out in the middle of the desert, and it's a government sanctioned village, government supported. So they have police to keep them safe, but also to keep them from doing anything to the tombs. Yeah. So there's a protection element built in. So it's hard to use Dir el-Medina for punishment. But at Dir el-Medina, one of the oaths, would you know the oath that they always say at Dir el-Medina? They say, "This is true. If it's not true, may my nose and ears be cut off, and may I be sent to Nubia." So that means that one of the punishments that people get in the Egyptian world, probably with the flick of a wrist of some tribunal somewhere,
and that wouldn't show on your body after death.
You're just sent to sent to the stone mines, or sent to the quarries. But imagine being marked like that first: nose cut off, ears cut off, and then you're sent to Nubia to mine gold or work in the quarries. Your body's gone. We're not going to find any evidence of that. And somebody's nose or ears being cut off, you wouldn't find that in decay. Yeah, I suppose you might, Rose Campbell or somebody who's
depending like
could maybe see a cut mark or a cut mark here on the cartilage. I have no idea. But
so I think a good example is the tomb robbery papyrus.
Yes.
Where we do know what happened to those people.
Yes.
Because again, it's against the crown.
But tomb robbery papyrus, it's a good thing to bring up, because you send down, first of all, the people making the decisions don't trust each other. From the tomb robbery papyri, it seems. So you have the vizier sending down his scribe, and he's there. And then the king is sending down his scribe and his butlers. So he's got a little entourage. And then the Dir el-Medina guys have their own entourage. And then the mayors of Thebes have their own little entourage, and they're there. Everyone's agendas are competing with one another. But what they do is they make inspections. So they go and say, somebody says, "Oh, this tomb was ransacked." And they're like, "Well, we will go and inspect it." Yep. And they go to the place, they look at it, they find the people who are involved, who are being said to have done something, and they interrogate them, and they interrogate them through torture. So the torture is clear. They say it very openly. So they beat them, they hit them, they use other methods to get them
to turn on each other.
To turn on each. They make them name names. Kind of like putting them alone in the room.
You tell us maybe something as bad happened to you.
I have no idea if they did sleep deprivation or anything like that, but it does seem like they throw people into prison like places and then get them to turn on their family members or other people who might have been involved. And then they do another inspection, maybe with the guy they've just tortured with them. Show us this place, which means that they know that their tortured interrogation is not necessarily going to be precise or even useful. So then even after they get information, they go to the place, and it is listed in the tomb robbery papyri that one man who gave information under torture, they bring him to the place, and then the thing that he said he had done, they find no evidence of it having been opened or anything having, or he couldn't find, I think it's that he couldn't find the place. That he said under torture that he had violated. So, and then what's some of these people are just beaten. Some of them, and then let go. Some of them, it seems worse happens to them. And there's little bits of information that death might have been the punishment meted out, and that death may have happened through impalement, which is, well, what is that? You know?
Stick a big pointy stick up their
not up their butt. No,
like up their,
they put it here at the ribs. They put it at the ribs and they balance it probably like at the soft tissue here, but
like
at the ribs, so that you get the internal bleeding and you're there like laying on it. It takes a long time to die. You could be laying this way and you put it in the ribs in the back, but it's just a really horrible, long, slow death, and it's a public thing. Yeah. So it is possible they killed people in that way. But yeah, the other interesting thing about crime and punishment and decision making is that old, middle, new kingdom, it seems to be like tribunals and maybe like a mayor or a governor, some sort of prince who gets to make decisions, a local potentate who says you will have this, and then it's just done, right? As you move into the Bronze Age collapse time period, and you go from 19th dynasty to 20th dynasty, instead of having that kind of a system of justice, the Egyptians seem to move towards oracles, which is really interesting. And an oracle is the statue of a divinity that is put into a little carrying chair, little carrying thing, and they carry, the priests carry it around, and somebody goes and asks
up to the priest and says, "Oh,
yeah, like, somebody stole my goat."
Yeah, someone stole my goat, and like he did it, right? And then
and then the priest holding the oracle like move in a certain way. If it's a yes or no question, they can move in one direction or another. Or if there's we don't exactly know how the oracle works because they're not going to tell us, because it's supposed to be the god itself. And yet the oracle is making the decisions that a tribunal used to make ad hoc.
The priesthood then gets this power.
The priesthood gets the power. It's also something that's not happening behind smoky closed doors.
Everyone
one would argue
can see.
You don't have to be in the room where it happened, like where the Ken Bet was like this exclusive club of the in guys. Now it's happening in a public space, and everyone gets to be a part of that tribunal decision, to witness it, to see its fairness. And I think it's from a level of distrust that the Egyptian society is just like, we don't trust our patrons anymore. We don't trust their agendas. We don't believe that they're doing what is the correct and right procedure. And so they're like, let the god decide. That seems to be the decision.
And I wonder like what influence the crowd has on the decision. Like
exactly.
The crowd, the people are saying yes, then the god will concur with them. And
because if it's happening during a festival day, which we think a lot of oracles were, there would have been a big crowd gathered, and the priest would have known which way they were turning was going to bring the
sense the crowd's favor, disfavor towards something, and you want to make everyone or the majority of people happy.
And it makes me wonder, though, we really only have good evidence for oracles at the end of the New Kingdom, latter part of the New Kingdom, if they existed earlier, because a breakdown of government, of trust in government, this is not something that's new. Egypt goes through all kinds of ups and downs through its time period. It would be interesting to see if there was evidence for anything like that at the end of the 6th dynasty, at the end of the, during the 13th dynasty. Hell, the way kingship works during the 13th is almost oracle-like. Well, they just switch it around, it seems. Like you get to be king, and you get to be king. You get 2 months, you get 4 months.
That's great. Any other final thoughts on ancient Egypt true crime?
It's not something that's open for us to see. It's something that they keep pretty close to the vest, pretty private. Don't write it down. Don't talk about it very openly.
You don't even see kings being like compared to, like Roman emperors described as like, like megalomaniacs murdering.
No,
it's very like, you just don't talk about.
You don't talk about these things, and there's no need for the king to be a megalomaniacal autocrat. He's already an autocrat. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to go there. With Roman emperors, don't forget, a lot of those stories that are told about Roman
yes.
emperors are told by people who
Yes.
think they should be emperor or want to take down the emperor. The
Yeah.
amount of competition in that system is insane.
Mhm.
And the amount of regicides, whether they call themselves kings or not, in that system
Yes.
is off the hook.
Yeah.
Just Google for me murder of, or Google cause of death of Roman emperors, and you will go down a rabbit hole that is quite comfy and warm, and you will stay in that rabbit hole for way too long.
Well, I think the better is like how many actually died a natural death, and it's a very low number.
No, the majority do not die a natural death.
And only one was able to retire.
Yeah,
so
it's ridiculous. Why do you want to be emperor? It's horrible.
No, it's even related. They
so-
just kill you then too.
Yeah, so it's not that all of, that people aren't the same wherever you are. We have the same DNA, we're the same human beings, but the impetus for a crime or what you might get out of something could be much higher in a more competitive society versus than in Egypt, where you might get less for taking these kinds of risks and you might get way more punishment. And if there's no documentation of it, to me, that proves that there's very little recourse for people in claiming that something was done inappropriately and pushing back against that system. And one last thing, the eloquent peasant, the story of the eloquent peasant.
I was going to bring him up, but
there's this Middle Kingdom story where this eloquent peasant is unjustly accused of stealing from a wealthy man who brings him to court after court after court and essentially makes the peasant dance with his words. And that's why it's called the eloquent peasant. And
they speak very well,
and it goes all the way to the king. And then finally, and the peasant's about to kill himself. He's like, I can't handle this anymore. My poor family and everything, I've been in jail for all this time. This is horrible, horrible. And then he finally gets to the king, and the king gets to hear his beautiful speech. And they're like, oh, we're going to let you go. We were going to let you go the whole time.
Just wanted to hear you talk.
We just wanted to hear you talk. And that right there is ancient Egyptian justice in a nutshell.
Got to know the right people. Patronage.
So I'm not saying that the Romans and the Greeks are the better system. It's a highly competitive system in which more is visible, but you have to wade through it. And this one is less visible, but less competitive. And you could argue that less bad shit goes down because people benefit less from it. So it's just different systems. It's just different ways of being a human. So
very interesting. Well, thank you for listening to our spooky episode, part 1 and part 2 on both ghosts and hauntings and true crime, ancient Egypt style,
murder and killings,
all that good stuff.
Thank you to our listeners for your support and for subscribing wherever you listen. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star review and help raise our profile and let others know about it. Send your questions related to the show and topic suggestions for future episodes to karacooney@gmail.com. You can find the video version of the show on my YouTube page, and full show notes will be posted in the podcast section of my website, karacooney.squarespace.com. For that, thank you, Amber Myers-Wells. There you'll also find info on my books, upcoming lectures, and you can subscribe to my newsletter. You can find me on Facebook at Kara Cooney Egyptologist and on Twitter and Instagram at Kara Cooney. See you next time on Afterlives with Kara Cooney.